Hey there, my friend. Welcome back for another hopefully exciting episode of Drummer Daily. My name is Daniel, and I'm so happy you could join me. Today I am, right now, the moment that I'm saying this, I'm in my kitchen. I am turning on the oven. In fact, I'm doing that right now, setting it to 350 and then moving the oven rack. I am making cinnamon rolls for my family, mostly for my son, though, at the request of my son. As I'm recording this, we are getting down to the last week before school starts back during summer break. And so one of my hobbies that I really enjoy is baking, which is funny because I'm supposed to be gluten-free most of the time or all the time. And so, of course, I find a hobby that is pretty much nothing but gluten all the time. But it's great because I get to bake things and make them and give them to other people, which is a lot of fun. But anyway, my son has been asking for weeks now about cinnamon rolls. I make some cinnamon rolls that, if you ask me, are pretty darn good. And so he's been asking me about them for a while. And so I said, hey, before you go back to school, bud, I will make you some cinnamon rolls. So I've been working on and off all morning, getting everything ready, and the cinnamon rolls are all made. They're rising. The last step is to bake them. So my wife and my son went out to lunch, and I'm home baking cinnamon rolls while they're out. But hey, today I've got another question from you. Well, maybe not you specifically, but you as a listener, and one of you wrote in. And this question comes from Nathan, and he says, what insight do you have to offer on balancing the time you spend on tour away from home with spending time with your family? And he said he understands that it's a loaded and maybe personal question. It can differ greatly from person to person. And he said, he's heard about other drummers who also, were very busy, very famous, but also were dedicated to their families, and just curious about that. And then he wants to know how I have dealt with this aspect of a musical career. Well, I will tell you, Nathan, that's a great question, by the way. I'll just tell you what I did, because that's the only thing I can do. And I know other musicians, professional musicians, who have taken a drastically different approach to this than me. And so I don't necessarily know if there's anything that's wrong or right. It definitely depends on your family and your family dynamic. And for me, I made the decision based on having a wife at first, and then a wife and a son. And my approach changed as time went on, and I realized what I really wanted or didn't want and things like that. And so the same thing will happen for you. But the most important thing that I did related to time, touring, and things like that was and what I want to encourage you to do is you need to really, for lack of a better way of saying it, count the cost associated with going on a long tour. Basically, think about what's the longest amount of time that you would be willing to be gone. And the way that I would do this, because it's really hard to envision or imagine until it happens, is pick out a arbitrary day, in your regular life, and put a mark on the calendar on this day. And then I would say even set an alarm on your phone that repeats daily. Maybe if there's a special time of your day, like for me, I would do it maybe at bedtime for my son, where we put him to bed every night or something like that. I'd pick a time and set an alarm. And I would have that alarm be there to remind you every day, starting on this arbitrary day that you pick, that in this imaginary scenario you're thinking about and considering, that you'd be gone. And then every day, reminder that during this moment, you're gone. During this moment, you're gone. And of course, more than just more than just the nighttime, the bedtime thing, or whatever, the one time during the day, as much as you can remind yourself every day that in the scenario you would be gone, you would not be here for whatever you're doing right now, that you're going to miss some things. Start to count those things and start to perceive how long it really is. The longest in the last 5 years or so that I've been gone away from my family, since my son's been born, the longest I've been gone, I believe, was 13 or 14 days. So 2 weeks, which in the touring world is not that long. I know guys who have large families who were gone for 30 or 45 days, and they might have worked it out to catch a flight home one day in the middle of that and then leave, the next morning or something. So practically speaking, 30 to 45 days gone. That is a long, long time. And so the first part of it is, I think that a lot of musicians who get opportunities have not done the work on the front end to count the cost of what it really feels like to be gone that long. And when you get presented with an opportunity, that's a wonderful opportunity, you don't have an accurate perspective on what it really costs you emotionally in your relationships and everything else. And you also don't feel like you're prepared to say no because of that, and you take it on. And then later you realize how torturous it is to do that. And the other part of it is that especially if you do have a family, or you start to have kids or things like that, it doesn't get easier to leave. It actually gets harder. It got harder and harder and harder every time I would leave. I would tell you there were numerous occasions before I kind of like semi-retired from touring, or decided to take a nice long break like I'm in right now from touring, where I'd have those midnight bus calls, meaning I have to meet the bus at midnight to get on and go to sleep so I could wake up the next morning at the first tour stop, where I'd be driving to the bus, my family's asleep, and it was all I could do to like physically prevent myself from like pulling over, pulling a U-turn, and just going back home and just calling up the band and saying, sorry guys, can't do it. That happened a lot. And it never got easier. The other thing is, up until, I'm trying to think when it was, I guess maybe last year, so about a year ago, I had never been home on Halloween with my kid, and my young son, loving to dress up in costumes and stuff. I never got a chance to go out trick-or-treating with him, which Halloween's not like a super important holiday to us or anything, but it was always a bummer to get sent pictures of him in his costume and stuff. And so those kind of things aren't things you think about specifically if you try at all, if you even do think about the negatives of being gone like that until they actually happen. So the most important thing is, I would encourage you to try to emotionally give yourself a little feel for what it's like to be gone that much first. Number two is, I would say, try to, if you have a spouse or family, or even like a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, try to discuss with them what they think is, what that would be like for them, what their perspective is on that. The other thing, because sometimes they might have wildly different expectations, or you might project and say, well, I just assumed you didn't want me to do this because of this or that, but you didn't talk about it. All those kinds of things that I'm not a relationship therapist, so I can't tell you right or wrong. I can just say that it's always better to talk about things like that than not talk about them and then be surprised by what the other person thinks when it becomes a problem. But the other thing is, and I think this is probably the most important thing, is before you find yourself with opportunities or a choice to make, you need to decide ahead of time what you are willing to do and what you're not willing to do as far as time away from your family. Are there parts that are negotiable? Are there parts that are non-negotiable? For example, when I do studio time as best I can, this is not what I would consider a non-negotiable, but I try to be home for dinner. Sometimes sessions start later than that and they go on through the night, but I try to set that expectation with my family on the front end that, hey, this is starting later, so I won't be here for that, but then I am going to be home in time for bed or something like that. Anyway, I try not to have certain things are non-negotiable. So for me, if I'm in town, and I'm not playing a live gig, if I'm doing studio work, missing my kid's bedtime is a non-negotiable. And if I can't work it out where I can be home for that and the other party is not willing to negotiate, I will say no. Now, I will also point out that I'm at the point in what I'm doing where I feel comfortable saying no, but you may not feel that way early on in the whole thing. So I totally get that. If that's not where you're at, you might get there someday. But make a choice. That's the most important thing I want to talk to you about, is just make a choice about what you are willing to do and what you're not willing to do. Also know that unless you always have a choice. I was gonna say something that's actually not true. I always had a choice, even when I was, the drummer for the last band I toured with, All Sons and Daughters. I never once was presented with something where it was like, we're doing this, see you there. I'd let them know that I was pretty open and was able to do whatever. So they kind of they knew that, but I was always asked, hey, we're going to do a tour in the fall around this time, probably leaving around this time, probably coming back for this break, this and that. We probably won't be gone longer than 7 days at a time, whatever that was. Are you willing to do it? Or are you interested in doing that? Would you like to do that? I was always asked. And thankfully the answer with what I was presented with, I was always able to answer yes. But I was never just told what to do. Worst case scenario in any musical situation I was ever in, I never felt like I had to do anything I didn't want to do. If I didn't want to do it, and especially when it comes to balancing family and other things that are more important than a music career to me, I never felt like I couldn't choose. I could always say, you know what, in this situation, it's okay if I lose this opportunity in the long run even, because there's things I'm not willing to negotiate on. So it's going to be hard. To answer your question, there's not a way to make it easy. It's always going to be hard. It's always going to feel painful to leave your family behind and go travel for any reason. At least it is for me. But there are things you can do to make the decision-making process easier along the way. And that's what I've been talking about today, is how to make the decision easier to make. It may not feel great emotionally. It may not be less painful when the decision is actually made, but you've at least established some guidelines for how to answer for an opportunity when it comes along for you. I always say you got to practice for the gig you don't have yet, but I also think you need to mentally prepare for the gig you don't have yet, which means doing things like what we talked about today, where you decide what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, and really try to see what it feels like to be in those situations before they happen, so you are as prepared as you can be for them. Thanks a lot for that question, Nathan. That was a really great question, and I'm so happy that you could join me here on Drummer Daily, and I can't wait to talk to you again very soon. Bye for now.